Hey guys, welcome back to another piano tips video. I'm Stefan, and in this video I want to talk to you about the Hanon finger exercises. Should you do them? Are they good for you? How to practice them, and what are the alternatives? Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and make sure to check the notifications bell to never miss a new video. So what is the Hanon book? It's basically a collection of piano technique exercises, mostly finger exercises and scales, and it was compiled by a man called Hanon around 150 years ago, so a very long time ago, and he was a very well-known piano teacher. This book became so famous and so well-known that we still use it today. Now, the book divides the piano world into two big groups. Some people say it's a must for every pianist, and others say that it's actually doing harm if you do them. It's completely pointless. It's boring, dull, and it doesn't develop musicality. So where is the truth? Of course, when you have so contrasting opinions, the truth has to be in between the two somewhere. But let's just say that if a book is still in use after 150 years, there has to be something good in it. The reason why most people hate this book is because it's so repetitive, it is very rigid, and most importantly, it doesn't have any songs or any kind of pieces that would develop musicality, performance, and expression. So all of these exercises are based around moving your fingers, building strength, building independence, and learning specific patterns, but it's not exactly the most enjoyable thing to do if you do it for a long time. The book is actually 3 books, but nowadays they publish them as one book in 3 parts. The first section has a lot of exercises for like 5-finger positions and missing out certain fingers, strengthening fingers to make sure that every single finger is developed equally, and these basically follow one pattern, and if you learn that one pattern, you can repeat it endlessly. And that's basically all about the first section. The second section introduces thumb crossings and preparation for scales and arpeggios, and in the end it has a collection of all the arpeggios and scales in all 24 keys. The third section is a little bit more interesting. It focuses on other technical difficulties like note repetition, playing in thirds, playing in sixths, playing trills, and so on. Now, let's see why the book is good and why the book is bad. The good thing about the book is that it can actually be used by anybody, by beginners, intermediate, and advanced students. The exercises are really short, most of them, and it's very easy to memorize them, so you don't have to focus on reading and learning new music. The patterns are usually 1-2 bars long. You learn it and you repeat it, and you can go to the next one. The first section, which is before the scales, which usually stays in the 5-finger position, is also very good for small hands. The book contains the golden standard for scales and arpeggios, so if you don't have any books for scales and arpeggios, this book has all the standard fingerings for all the scales and arpeggios, minor, major, in every single key, so it's a good reference point if you're learning your scales. You can always come back to this book and check the fingerings, check the patterns for the scales and arpeggios. Now, what are the bad things about this book? Because the goods so far sounded like it's an amazing book to practice from. Well, this is the book here. It doesn't matter what edition you get, it's always going to be the same, and you can get it freely because it's in the public domain now, so you can download it for free from many different resources. If I have a beginner pianist student who is like 5 or 6 years old, and I want to give him a finger exercise, and I say to him, look, can you have a look at this exercise and do it for next week? They will look at the sheet music and they will run away and probably not come back. And the reason for that is when you look at something like this, which is so dense and there's so much written music, it's very scary for beginners to look at because they don't actually understand that the whole music in this is 1 bar, and that keeps repeating a note higher, 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 and it's just basically the whole sequence written out in this book. So I think the layout of the book is really bad. There are other technical books which have similar exercises which show you the pattern with a nice drawing or whatever, and then you basically know that the pattern is 2 bars and you just repeat it. I don't think there is an absolute necessity to write out the whole exercise because it takes up so much space and it makes it look much harder than it is. The second thing I don't like so much about the book is that it has too many similar patterns. The first section could be half the size because some of the patterns are so similar to each other, the finger exercise, that if you do I don't know, 5 out of 15, you're probably going to get the same kind of result if you're doing 15. So it's just too many exercises to focus on. They are too similar and you might get very bored very quickly. The other thing that is not very good about the book is the information given and the guidance for practice. There's very little given in the book about piano playing and technique and the body. The book keeps stressing finger independence, that you have to move your fingers independently without anything else moving in your body. And it also says that you should try this book after learning the piano for 1 year. But it also says things that you should practice this for an hour or two, and that's going to give you virtuoso qualities and abilities and skills. When you play the piano, you don't just play from your fingers. Piano playing is a mechanic activity, so the whole body is engaged. Every single muscle in your upper body is moving when you play the piano, so you cannot isolate these motions to your fingers and to your hands. And this is where the biggest problem comes when people start practicing this book, that they get horrible tension in their hands, and that's why they give up, because it's painful, they don't get results, and their playing actually gets worse. So what you need to understand is, just because the book doesn't mention anything about the rest of the body, the arms, the shoulders, the wrist, it doesn't mean that we don't need to think about those and avoid tension at all costs. Piano playing good technique is all about avoiding tension. If you start getting tension in these exercises, it means you're doing them wrong. Now, playing these exercises for an hour or two is probably suicide. I would not want any of my students to do that. I could not do that myself because it's just too much. It doesn't give you the same result as playing pieces for 2 hours. I'm not saying that the exercises are not great to warm up, but they are certainly not something that you should spend most of your practice time on. We also have to remember that this book was written 150 years ago when piano playing was very different. So basically, what worked 150 years ago might not work exactly the same nowadays. We have to go on with the times. We have to adjust to the new habits that we have, to the instrument, because the piano has changed in the past 150 years. It's louder, it's heavier, it's bigger. So we cannot look at a book that was written almost 2 centuries ago the same way today as we would look at it back then. So all in all, when you have a look at this book, make sure to do it with a pinch of salt and judgment. Try to make it work for yourself, for your goals, and for the amount of time that you can spend practicing piano every single day. Now, let's come to another big question. Do you need this book or do you not need this book? So let's start with, when do you not need this book? So as I said, there are so many alternatives to these exercises nowadays, and depending on how you study piano and what kind of grades you do and what kind of structured learning, you might already be doing many of the exercises from this book or similar ones, and you might not even be aware of it. So if you're doing like an ABRSM style studying, or Trinity, or the graded standards where you have grade 1 to grade 8 or grade 10 in Canada, US, the UK, Australia, any other parts of the world, in those exams you have to play the scales and arpeggios right from the beginning, from grade 1, and many of them, like Trinity, also offer you technical exercises at every single grade. So if you're doing those, then you don't really need any of these things from this book, because the technical exercises are going to cover most of the challenges that the finger exercises present in this book. And you're also going to have all of your scales and arpeggios learned for the exams from the exam books. If you have a Schmidt book, which looks like that one, is extremely similar, almost identical to the Hanon book. It has the same scales, finger exercises, and technical challenges. So if you've been following this book, then no need to change to that one. They're almost completely identical. If you know these books, which are called A Dozen a Day, and you've been studying from them when you were a child, or you are teaching children and you're using these books, again, it's very similar to Hanon, but it's much better laid out for children. It has really nice drawings in it and just showing the pattern itself, and then you can repeat it as much as you want. So these books are graded from 1 to 5 and are very similar to the Hanon book. They cover the same kind of technical difficulties, and I would say they're a lot more varied, and they cover more areas of technical difficulties, and they are more progressive. So if you have these books and you're doing your scales, again, don't even look at Hanon because it's pointless. It's the same thing, and these are much better and more modern in their look. If you're doing scales and you want to do some more finger exercises in the form of songs, then you can have a look at something called Czerny or Burgmüller. Now, these two books are not finger exercises as such. They are called etudes or studies because they focus on one technical difficulty, but they put it into a song. So it's a lot more enjoyable to play, and you can also develop on your expression and musicality at the same time as working on your technique. Czerny has hundreds of thousands of songs and many books. The two most famous ones are Opus 599 and Opus 299. 599 is for beginners, or 823, The Little Pianist. So if you do any of these books, they have around 100 exercises, and they are very nice little tunes, not as pretty as a Chopin song, but they are still melodic, and they are definitely more enjoyable than playing Hanon. If you choose Burgmüller, it's a little bit more advanced, so you would do this from grade 1 upwards. And these ones are much prettier, more romantic songs. And again, every single song or piece in the book is focusing on one technical difficulty. So you can work through these difficulties in the context of a piece. Now, let's come to the final stage. If you do decide that you really want to do Hanon because somebody told you that you have to do it, or you're just really curious, then here are some tips on how to practice them. The first thing is don't overdo it, because you'll get tired, you'll hate it, it's very boring. So do 5-10 minutes depending on how long you practice. If you can practice every day for an hour, then maybe do 5 minutes, or if you do your scales from the Hanon book, then do 10-15 minutes and then spend 45 minutes on your pieces. Don't spend as much time on finger exercises as you would spend on pieces. You'll be much better off doing pieces. I'm not the kind of teacher who would say you can learn everything from pieces. I do firmly believe that we need a good balance of pieces and easier, focused technical exercises, but they shouldn't be overpowering the time that we spend on pieces. So make sure you do a small amount, pick 2-3 exercises at a time. And the most important thing about the Hanon exercises is to tailor them to your own level. So if you're at the very beginning of your piano studies and you can't move your fingers very fast and you still struggle to find your way on the keyboard, then do the finger exercises in 2 octaves. Don't do them on the whole piano, just do them on 2 octaves. And the same applies to the scales. Do them first hands separately, just 1 octave, then do them hands together 1 octave, bring it to 2 octaves, and then graduate it to 4 octaves. This book doesn't really make any difference between beginner and intermediate advanced. If you're advanced, you would play your scales hands together 4 octaves in thirds, sixths, and parallel contrary motion very fast. But if you're at grade 2 or grade 1, you would play your scales much slower, sometimes hands separately, sometimes hands together, and just on 2 octaves. So you have to bear in mind that when you do your scales in the second part of the book, you have to do them in mind with the level of your abilities and piano skills. Another tip would be to not do the entire book. I think it's completely pointless. If you do half of the finger exercises and maybe another half of the third part, then it's going to give you enough exercises to work on your technique and your ability and dexterity. The middle section is probably more important. That's where you have your scales and arpeggios, and that's kind of a standard for all pianists. You have to know your scales and arpeggios in every single key. And now let me just give you a couple of tips on how to play and what to watch out for in your body when you play these exercises. So what the book says is that for the finger exercises, you have to play them by lifting your fingers independently and keeping everything else static. So just working from the fingers to strengthen them and give them more flexibility. It would look like this. So nothing here is moving, and then the faster you start playing it without any motion in the rest of your body, you start getting horrible tension and pain. So what you want to do when you play, especially these flowing up and down exercises, small scales, is that you follow it with your hand, with your arm, and your wrist has to be completely free and flexible. And you would do a little bit of rotation in your hands as well. So I would do it like this. When I'm ascending on the scale, I'm moving my wrist and my arm, and I'm descending back. I'm still mostly working from my fingers. I don't want to put too much arm weight into it. It's not like a big Chopin chord, you know, like... where you would want to put your whole body into that chord. It's just a finger exercise, but it's not just your fingers that work. Your fingers are connected to your palm is connected to your wrist, to your forearm, to your shoulders. So everything has to move as a group. And this is the key thing when you practice these exercises, to make sure that you don't play them with a rigid wrist, with lots of tension, because then you're going to hurt yourself and it's not going to improve your technique at all. So this was my little review of the Hanon book. I think it has lots of benefits and many interesting finger patterns. It's a great resource for scales and arpeggios, and also some other technical difficulties. If you have alternatives, some more modern and more approachable, easier on the eye alternatives, I would probably always prefer those, like Dozen a Day or Burgmüller, or doing scales for the exams in a more structured way. The book is called The Virtuoso Pianist. Believe me that learning this book from beginning to end is not going to make anybody a virtuoso pianist, but not even a pianist, because the one thing really missing from this book is expression and musicality. So you don't actually learn how to play a piece or a song. All you're doing is learning isolated exercises that can present technical challenges when you play your pieces. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments bar and let me know what other videos you would like to see. Thank you very much for watching. See you soon.